accountability, the ability to hold our leaders to account. There are massive ambitions for this field. And really what this panel is going to try to address is the question, well, you know, is that possible? Are there holes in those ambitions? What might we actually have to work on to try to achieve some of them? And quite a lot of us, I should think, in our day jobs spend a lot of time persuading people of the importance of this argument. This now is an opportunity for us together to be amongst friends. We don't need to persuade each other that this is actually an interesting idea. What we have to do is work on the reality of trying to achieve those dreams and what do we do to do that. Okay, quick introductions. To my right, Teresa Grant, who's Deputy Chief Executive of Trafford Council, advocate for open data. Chris Taggart, developer of Openly Local and most recently Open Corporates, who describes himself as he opens data whether people like it or not. Sounds painful. We have Tim Davis from Practical Participation, who brings a social science perspective and grounding to the discussions. And Andrew Stott, former Director of Transparency and Digital Engagement at the Cabinet Office, and now a member of the Public Sector Transparency Board. So I'm going to invite Andrew to talk.
Right. Thanks, Kerry. The Cabinet Office is a bit like the Hotel California in the Eagles song. You can check out, but you can never leave. But at least now I've given up actually working there. I have more time for open data. I mean, the provocation for today was, you know, can a technological initiative provide so much? And yes, it can. Because I don't think this is actually a technological initiative. And having worked on the data release side for 2 years, one of the learning points was it wasn't really an IT project. IT was the least of the problems. We talked to the CIOs at the early stage, but didn't get back to them. They're not big player. The IT community is not a big player in the policy formulation and the execution. It's fundamentally a political initiative driven in large part by elected politicians' view that trust in government can only be maintained these days if government is more open and transparent. And that's why politicians are prepared to be so masochistic about open data. It's also a behaviour and cultural change initiative where public servants have to learn that they're the custodians of the public's data, not the owners of it. And Francis Maud had a saying that first you change the behaviour, and that's the way you get the culture to change. And it's also a growth initiative. The belief that the economy and society will be strengthened if more effective use is made of data that is not just reserved for government, but other people can innovate from that and do useful things with it. It requires some clever developers, some clever geeks along the way. But one of the things that's apparent so far is that the geeks aren't into technological exhibitionism. They're actually coming up with some really great ideas of what useful services might look like. That having been said, we are just at the beginning. We have a long way to go to build what you might call the ecosystem of open data, for an open data democracy, as we call it. It's about developing the army of armchair auditors. Those people are actually going to go to Openly Local every day, see what's new about their authority, and take action about it. They're going to organise around it. It's about developing the data journalists, where it's not just the sort of 172 civil servants paid more than the Prime Minister, but actually driving analysing the data, studying it to find out what it means about how public services are responding. It's about getting a maturity of political leadership. So there will be unpleasant things in there, and making politicians sufficiently confident that they can defend the broad programme, even though down the line some strange things have happened. It's about developing listening public agencies. Agencies that are prepared to listen to what the public think of their services driven by data and are prepared to change as a result. Otherwise, it's not worth doing at all. And it's about building those other parts of the ecosystem, the tools, the specialisms, the standards, the funding. And one of the things you see different US compared to the UK is in the US, quite a lot of the funding to make use of that data for transparency is coming from charitable foundations. That mechanism hasn't really taken off in the UK yet. And it's about using what's learned about this data to improve how data is collected and used in government. And a classic finding that Chris Taggart's helped with is that departments and agencies don't actually have a good idea of what they're spending with each supplier. So how are they effectively managing the contracts? And it's only been 2 years and 2 months since Tim Berners-Lee's TED Talk that launched this worldwide. About that time, since the publication of the Power of Information Task Force, exactly 2 years tomorrow since I was first appointed in the Cabinet Office. If this had been a conventional government IT project, we wouldn't have settled the specification yet, let alone tendered to the usual suspects for a big IT implementation. So let's be proud of what's been achieved. Very nearly 100 national and municipal open data sets worldwide now in the databases. In the mid 90s, we're just about to get there. Sorry, Manchester, you did data GM just that bit too early. But there's an enormous distance to go, and we've got much more to do. We've got to maintain momentum. We've got to maintain the political focus and the leadership. This isn't tick in the box done, and that means continued commitment, not just for 1 year, but I think this is now looks like a five-year program of broadening out, developing the skills, getting more data, and getting this data to make a difference.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Okay, we're going to take just one quick question, if there is one, and then move on to panel members, and then we'll have space to kind of pull out commonalities, issues, and concerns across all of them. If there is one quick question at this point. Point of clarification, concern, do you want to pick Andrew up on anything? Do you think the government has been doing a brilliant job over the last 2 years? Yes, no, there we go, right?
Armchair auditors. I just have these visions of people in garden sheds cherry-picking data for political purposes. It makes me feel a bit queasy. I mean, and the notions of open data, the kind of interfaces and the skills needed to interpret and engage with the data, they're not found commonly in the public sphere, only in very small groups of people. So could somebody speak about that, please?
Okay, sorry, I meant to say earlier, we're going to go through, everybody has got something they're going to say, so I'm going to capture that question. So, around armchair auditors, and can somebody speak to that? All right, we'll hold on to that for a second. Teresa, if you'd like to come back.
And I think I might be able to pick up some of your question as well around small numbers of people having the skills to interpret and utilise open data. So I'll try and capture some of that in mind as well. And really I wanted to talk about, can open data on its own drive a new economy based on innovation and create a more equitable society? And open data is seen as providing space for innovative services, more efficient government, re-enfranchisement of the public, and can open data and transparency provide so much? Does society have the skills to understand and act on transparency? And can open data on its own drive a new economy based on innovation and create a more equitable society? And I think one of the major issues is access to information and skills and skill bases across the whole of the country. They're not equitable. And if you look at, and I know that picture is changing as we become more adept with technology. In 2006, 14.5 million UK households, and that was about 57% had an internet accessibility. In 2010, 19.2 million, and that's 73% of households had internet access. And that's about 16% increase in 4 years. And that's continuing all the time, as we know. But it's not clear whether this represents an increase in the lowest income distribution households, and that's how it's measured. And this is where we're concerned that people are actually being left behind. And if they had more information out there about open data, actually people might understand and realise and want to access it more. And it's a bit of a chicken and an egg, really. We know that access to internet technology is critical, and the development of skills is critical to actually be able to utilise and benefit from open data. and that's basic needs that we have. And that depends, according to the Office of National Statistics, depends on income. And I said earlier, I think in the session, there's lies, damn lies in statistics. I think that's right. So we have to be careful about what we're told about statistics. Can open data on its own drive an economy based on innovation? I would like to think it can drive it, maybe not on its own, but I'd like to think it's certainly one of the catalysts and one of the ways that we can drive it. And from my own experience, what we've done where I'm based at Trafford is we've started to tap into the expertise outside of the local authority and outside of our partners in AGMA as well, because we realise we don't have the resources to make the most of opening up our data and utilising data in a way that makes it useful for the public and hands it over to the public. And I fully believe, and I said in the earlier session, we are custodians, we're caretakers of data, we don't own the data, and we should make sure we utilise all the skills we can to open that up to the public. And the mere fact of open data transparency and accountability and their dynamic expression within the Data GM site, it's helped us to understand much better the power of data, and that's become a very real realisation. And it's not just because of the government agenda over the last couple of months driving that, but actually we almost reached that point before they did, and I'm quite happy that we did that. So we're constantly just ahead. You know, our conversations are changing. We talk about open data and accessibility, transparency amongst elected members in a way we never did before. It's much more acceptable as a topic, and because I suppose we were leading the way, and members like to lead the way a lot. They encourage it. They're supportive of it. We feel much less institutionalised as a result of that. It's made almost the AGMA family open up a little bit more. We're not there yet, so I wouldn't go crazy and say we're totally trusted. We have to still get people over the hurdle of trusting the open approach. And silos are breaking down and will break down as a result of that. So in terms of the contribution it can make to that equality agenda, I think it's very, very powerful. But people need the skills, and only a small number of people currently have the skills to manipulate open data and actually make it useful intelligence and information. And the IT skills are improving in deprived areas as well, and the latest stats that we've looked at have shown that, and that's through hopefully schools, etc. But every kid now wants to be on the internet, so hopefully in the future we'll see a much greater ability to use this data. And I would say probably this room has more skilled people that can do more with open data and manipulate it than probably the rest of the population at this very moment in Greater Manchester. So the greatest concentration is probably here. So maybe we should give you a little task today and say, here's some data, turn it into something useful. As more and more data becomes open, we're trying to position ourselves and place ourselves where we can generate and understand and manipulate the data in a way that's useful to drive services and drive efficiencies as well. To use it, locate it, support it, we're trying to get partnerships involved, and we've been very successful in doing that, and we're still talking to quite a lot of people around how that data can be used to skill people up and to create jobs and to create equalities. There is an expectation among communities and service users that we will increase the personalisation agenda. We've certainly driven a lot of that forward through service development, but personalisation, I think, is the way of the future, and engagement with citizens is the wishes of the current government, but it's also the wishes of most of the local authorities that I'm involved with, as we become much more dependent on the public accepting that we can't deliver services the way we did anymore. If they don't come on board and join with us in developing the future services, we will suffer as a result. And we need much more equitable public services and an equitable approach to skills and open data in order to make it a more equitable society.
Thank you very much, Teresa. I want to flag a worry with the word skills and the way we're using it and talking about it, because quite often skills, I'm a professor of education, it's one of my obsessions, gets used as a proxy for actually talking about issues of income, questions of politics. So I want us to sort of unpick what we mean by skills. Which skills? What skills do you have that means you can say, well, I'm confident that I can do it, but I worry about these other people? Sometimes, are we really talking about skills, or are we talking about concerns that we may hear, things that we don't want to hear? Or are we talking about the fact that some people simply don't have money, don't have resources, don't have access? And do we need a much stronger socio-economic and political economic discussion around access to fundamental tools and resources? So I just want to sort of drop that in and ask you to be thinking about, well, what do you mean when you use the word people need skills? What sorts of things are you thinking about when you're making those assertions? Is there one point that we can raise and pick up from? Thank you.
I'm reminded of Tony Blair saying, the purpose of government is to govern. At the end of the day, the acid test, as far as I'm concerned, and I think that this is valid of other members of the public, is can I reach you directly? Because as far as I'm concerned, data and all the wonderful linguistics does not solve the problem. The problem is a person-to-person problem. And unless that's recognized, then it's going to be another round of, this is the solution, this is the holy grail, and it won't be.
That's incredibly helpful. What is the problem we're trying to solve here? Let's work on that in a little bit. Okay, now I'd like to invite Tim to talk just now. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll try and pick up on some of that. What I'm speaking from is, having spent a lot of last year looking at open data in practice, I did a year-long research program taking the arguments made about open data, but then really looking at tens of detailed cases of how people were using data. And one thing that became clear very quickly was there's this open data movement, but it's made up of many different people solving many different problems. And we have to actually pick those apart, because they might agree on they want data, but they don't necessarily agree on many other things. So we've got the public sector information movement, people who want to exploit public sector information for commercial benefit, looking at the US model where data is from government is more open and more free, and the economic benefit that can bring. And so very much looking at how can data, particularly from government, be used to build businesses, build innovation. We've got a freedom of information movement who are looking at the transparency, accountability of government on an aggregate level, but also looking at how do individuals in their interaction with the state have equal access to information. So there isn't a state that holds on to data and citizens who don't have it. So we equalise and make sure power is more balanced there. And then we've got the small startup innovators looking at how can they use data either as social entrepreneurs to improve the way particular government services are delivered or to build small local businesses. And then coming into that, we've had a group of people really interested in the technology, maybe interested in linked data technologies or open data technologies, and really interested in how can government be re-engineered in a digital age and rethought, perhaps going out of e-government movements. So all those people are there together, and we then have to ask, well, what does that mean for the way open data has played out? And I'm going to pick out the critical threads of that to get us going with some discussion. Though in the research write-up, I look a lot at the opportunities as well. One of the big things that struck me, though, is that often when data is framed, it's framed as if data is for developers. And a big mantra I've been repeating, data's not just for developers. We don't necessarily have to have all data filtered through technical intermediaries. Often what people want from data is a particular fact that's relevant to them. And the most powerful data visualization tool that most people can use is the highlighter pen. They can go to the table and highlight that cell, that figure telling me that my chance of getting a kid into the school locally is worse than it is in the neighbouring borough, and I'm going to wave that spreadsheet at my local council and ask, why is that? That simple fact doesn't need a developer, it needs someone just to have access to that data. So there's a big part of the opening up data that's not about developers building things, but about individuals having access to information that can help them live their lives, help them interact with government. And so we then do find some data, though, needs more complex processing, needs things done to it, does need intermediaries, does need developers or statisticians to help us make sense of things. And I think the key point that access to those people is not evenly distributed. There's a lot of things done with transport data. There are a lot of iPhone apps for people who commute regularly around London. That's not the mass of the population. Developers often meet the needs that developers have, and developers often are from particular socio-economic backgrounds. So we see a distortion in what needs get served with open data when we don't pay attention to the differences in who the intermediaries are in using that. And I think we've also got this challenge that we've focused on open government data rather than open data, and that's selective. So actually Chris is doing some great work with open corporates, opening up data on companies. But there is this challenge that if we have an open data ecosystem that's only government being transparent but isn't other institutions being transparent, what does that do to the balance of power between government, citizens and those other institutions? And how does that play out? So do we need to be calling for open data in other contexts as well? And I think Andrew started by saying this has been a political movement. And we can often forget the political nature of open data, and it's interesting to look at which data sets have been opened and which haven't. So from personal experience, I've been asking for structured data on the strategic export controls. Where are we exporting arms around the world? What licenses are being issued by the government? You'd think opening that data up for public scrutiny, given events in the world over the last 6 months, would be something we should be doing. You can go to a website where you can request a download of the data in a way that when you get it is entirely useless to analyse where we're exporting or issuing arms or revoking arms licenses. So it's very interesting if you look at which data sets are released and which aren't, and the politics of that, and the battle is still to be fought about what data should be open. Have we got in principle, or have we got political decisions most of all? And I think I'll end. There's many more things that can be said, but that point on data creating democracy or supporting democracy or a data-driven democracy. There are many forms of democracy. I started out life as a political theorist, and you can go from competitive electoral democracy, where we need data to help us hold elected representatives to account, where we need it for transparency and accountability and to make voting decisions, through to notions of democracy where it's about consumerist democracy. It's about us voting with our choices in a marketplace for public services. Those aren't necessarily models of democracy you'll find together, yet all of those open data plays a role in. So it's not just asking, does open data support democracy? It's asking, what sort of democracy do we want it to support? The key in that is it's not all about challenging openness and saying we shouldn't be open. It's about saying openness is challenging, and we've got to engage with those challenges of deciding what do we want to do with this resource that is becoming more available, and how do we want to make, recognising open data is political, what political decisions do we want to make in how we use it?
Thank you. Excellent. I'm not going to say anything. Right. Any points specifically in response to Tim, or shall I move on to Chris? I have a feeling you two may have things in common. Yes, go for it.
I'm still working out what I'm going to say, actually.
I think you can cogitate a little bit now.
So, I run Openly Local and Open Corporates, other stuff. Open Corporates has got about 100 gigabytes of data. It runs on a virtualized Zen system written in Ruby 1.87 on a Rails framework with a MySQL background database, various background queue jobs running customized scrapers. Should you care? Do you care? Absolutely not. And neither do I, actually. I absolutely have no interest in that technology. It's about solving problems. It's about, when people ask me why I'm doing this, and I sold my business about 5-6 years ago, I say 3 things. One is having fun. 2 is making the world a little less shit. It's not making it perfect. It's not trying to say we're going to these sunny uplands where, there will be nectar for everyone every day. It's about solving a few problems and making things a little bit less shit. And the 3rd is to have a sustainable business and to make it so that you can keep on going every month on it. But I'm not interested in becoming rich. And actually, those problems that we want to solve, we actually have some really big problems. And probably the biggest one we have at the moment is information asymmetry. In that the amount that we know and we have the ability to know versus the amount that other people, privileged people, whether it's because they have access to Experian, to Dun & Bradstreet, to credit records, to your shopping habits or whatever, or governmental data versus the amount you know, that information asymmetry is getting wider every day. I've been speaking quite a lot in Europe recently, and there's significant worries there about privacy. And I think that's to misunderstand it, because when they're talking about privacy in terms of opening data, one of the things they fail to understand is that actually pretty much all of this data already is available to people. It's just not available to everybody. If you're running Tesco's, if you're running this database, if you're in a big company, you have already access to this, because it's trivial to spend $10,000 or whatever in order to buy that. In fact, not only is it trivial, that you like the fact that it costs you money to buy it, because it restricts access to a certain type of to a certain sort of people and to certain groups. And for me, it is quite political, but it's not really about the data insofar as, from a technological point of view, it's about the openness. And when we're talking about one of the things that's different now, and why I don't think it's necessarily, it's certainly not a silver bullet, and it's not even necessarily about severe issues about where this is going and what the consequences will be, is because because our lives are becoming data. We've always been governed, going back to the Doomsday Book, our lives have been governed by data and censuses and so on. But now our lives are increasingly becoming data. I mean, whether it's on the financial, our virtual lives, whatever, it almost, even, the person that has very little control of use of technology, their lives are, for all intents and purposes, just some bits and numbers on the network. And it's a network which you don't have visibility of either. It's a network which you can't see. And so part of the overriding thing of what I'm doing is actually try to surface that network, to try to see the connections, to try to see the links and make that visible, and try to, in a very small way, and it is a very small way, to reduce some of those imbalances in asymmetry. I certainly wouldn't say that open data is a panacea. I think at best it is an enabling technology, but an enabling technology is one that enables, it doesn't solve the problem, it enables, and that still requires us, and that it actually puts more of a requirement on us to actually do something about it. And that's a problem because lots of people don't want to do things about it. It goes back to the Brave New World idea. Quite a lot of people are happy to be just consumers. So in that context, then is that problematic? If you actually had an enabling technology, do you actually allow other asymmetries to happen? Because the technology is enabled for some people, for those that want to do something about it. I don't know what the answer to these is, but I do see that actually, without open data, let's just forget the open data, and let's just talk about data. When most people talk about data within government, with power, with money, they actually mean closed data. And they're fine about it being closed data because it reinforces and reproduces these power systems that exist. And so in that context, open data is quite political, not because it's a big solution, not because actually it's going to make everyone's lives wonderful and give ourselves a new form of government is all going to work perfectly. It's because the alternative is closed data, which is what we've currently got for the most part and what we're aiming at, and that certainly is not what we want.
Okay, thank you very much to the panel. Right, what I'd like to do now is just open up to questions, comments, and suggestions from you guys in the audience, because these sorts of conferences can be massively dominated by the people on the stage, and seeing as we're having an open data discussion, the issue might be, can we surface and make visible some of the knowledge, ideas, and suggestions that might exist out here. So, Julian, who's just jumped in. He's a coordinator of the thing. He's allowed to claim first speech.
Hey, there we go. I was interested in what you were saying, Chris, about data asymmetries. And do you think there's also what we could say is it's almost like a cognitive asymmetry in the sense of this has come upon us so quickly that we don't have the base awareness. Society does not have the base awareness to know what data is. So it's that our consumer habits, the way that we interact with online services on social media, we don't actually know what we're doing. We don't understand the power of that data, and especially when that data is aggregated. And generally that data is put away somewhere for one organisation or others, commercial organisations use. So do you think there is a dire need for that awareness level to be raised across society, almost at a kind of educational basis, at a school level?
Yeah, I think there are two aspects there. And actually I think probably Kerry is probably more able to answer the second one. The first is actually the base education one, which is that people don't, are scared of data, don't get data. People within, within councils, increasingly councils, all councils are data processing departments. Is that they take stuff in, data in, whether it's in the form of money or whatever, but they, and even that's been calculated by some sort of, formula or whatever, and then they, work out what to do with it based on some other set of rules and so on, and then they send it out because increasingly they're not even delivering them services themselves, or it's being aggregated by a bunch of councils working together. So increasingly they are data processing departments, if you like, and yet most councils, and I would say Trafford is one of the is a big exception, in that actually they really. My experience of them has been that they're really getting this in a both philosophically and almost instinctively as well. They just don't have anybody that understands data, or with any power, anyone in any power that understands data, and that's a bit like having nobody that understands accounts in them, in the way the world is. So one is that there needs to be a better understanding of this in terms of education, what it means, actually the fact that every time we use one of these or sit down at a computer or watch a TV or anything, we're dealing with data. The second one is one that I'm not really feel qualified for, which is one of perspective, which I think you were asking about in terms of whether they see the world. I kind of think of it as the red pill, blue pill question. And whether people are going to, it's a question of, okay, do you want to, this is what the world is really like? Do you want the red pill or whatever colour it is? Do you want the red pill and continue to see the world as it really like, or would you rather go back to your safety of having the blue pill and so on? And if we want to have it, given open data as an enabling technology, it does require more people to take the red pill or whatever colour it is, and to get engaged and to get involved and to do things about it, and that is another challenge, and not one I feel qualified to speak on.
Right, okay, my colleagues to my left are...
Because Chris talked about closed and open in terms of within the bureaucracy and then when you're outside, and believe me, having recently moved from very much inside to outside, government is bloody hard to deal with. And I just hadn't realised at all. But there's also another form of information inequity that leads to social inequity, which is actually some members of the public, it's called the middle class, have been traditionally better at manipulating the education system, the health system and like that, and actually giving more data about what's good and what's bad, and some power to influence that also gives an equity of access to public services. So it's not a sort of black and white. There was something there. That means getting people, empowering those communities to go after that. Someone asked about the armchair auditors. I don't think anyone's actually going to become an armchair auditor. What I do see in my community is a whole myriad of little community groups, some about locality, some about cycling. I'm secretary of one about rail travel commuters who have sort of loose alliances and are looking for information and trying to influence. It's not perfect at all, but we're more and more in dealing with bureaucracies. You've got to be data driven and show the case. And there is something about also understanding the public understanding of information and data and numbers. Lies, damn lies and statistics was a Disraeli saying, or so it's said, although no one's actually managed to trace it back to him. And actually, statistics, numbers, data have always been misused in political debate.
Yep.
That's what political debate is like.
Brilliant. Thank you, Tim.
Yeah.
So I think, and then you picked up that people are looking for information, they're not looking for data, and that's exactly the way it should be. Data is the way we get information to flow, be used, remixed in different contexts, but often people want a fact about their local area, or they want some information on a particular topic. And it's about building the ecosystem so that can be found. But actually, there's something that on one hand scares me in the idea of a council as a data processing department. That sort of framing of it, I'm far more comfortable with my council as a storytelling and conversation space and an action space that's got a very human interface, because there is that risk that if we focus on data processing, data is about taking information, abstracting it so we can use it in multiple contexts, but taking the context away from it at the point where we're dealing with it in many, many ways. So we need to actually make sure we keep stories, conversations in there, and don't go to being entirely data-driven, be data-enabled, but driven by information, social need, what we want to change.
I'd just like to pick up a couple of points, really, and that's, I would have to talk about councils as being data processors, obviously. And I'd like to think that in the perfect world, they wouldn't be data processors, but what they would do is use data as an enabler to drive, as I've said before, the way they deliver services in a human way, and a human aspect of data. And I think the word data itself scares people a little, unless you're a techie or a data type person. And it's information, and it's back to your point, nobody cares about how many bits behind it and what format it's in. And most of the public will never understand that, or never care or try to or want to. What they want is information. They don't see it as data. It becomes information to them at the user end, and they want to know what's the best school for their kids, and they want to know where, if they have an inequitable access into the schools in their area, and is it easier or better somewhere else. And you know, as local authorities, and I can only speak as a local authority, there's a real onus on us, and a real, I think, if we don't open the access the data that we have to the public, it's a really bad message to give the public that are paying our salaries, that actually we're hiding this information from you because we think you'll do something terrible with it. And it's not data, and we have to get away from this idea of data. It's pure information. It's information that people are entitled to have, and it shouldn't disrupt anything by giving people access to that. It should enhance the lives of the people who use our services for the benefit of the public. Do you want to come in, Tim?
No, we'll get to the questions then.
No, that's fine. I just want to flag, US, one of the leading countries for open data. You've got 35% of young people don't make it to the end of high school. This is significant numbers of people with no basic literacy and numeracy skills. We have an interesting conversation to have around the ideas that we're presenting here. We're talking about, you know, who commutes best, who gets access to the right schools. I mean, these are discussions. Who's not in this room? Who's not here at the moment? Who's not part of the conversations that we're having? What are we actually doing as developers, as councils, as activists to get out of the familiar, you know, technologically literate communities that we're hanging out in? And that's a concern that I have personally. Anyway, I share that. Right, okay. Other questions? It's great. I get to sit in the middle and just share my biases. Right, other questions here. Actually, we've had one from you, sir. If you wouldn't mind waiting for a little bit. There's somebody at the back with a strike, down the middle. Sorry.
Hi there. It's a question for Andrew, really. There's a famous episode of the Thick of It where Malcolm tries to bury a story by just emailing out as much data as he can possibly can to all the journalists he knows. And it seems like a danger with open data that you can be blinded with it quite easily. And I was wondering what he thought on that, and how to prevent it, and how to prevent politicians doing that.
We were accused of that, of putting the coins data out. 24 million lines. Took 2 hours to download, and then it crashed your copy of Excel. And within 24 hours, The Guardian had built a data explorer, and Where Does My Money Go also did something with it in a similar timescale. Brought out for the first time that government writes off about 600 million a year in bad debts, which had never been brought together anywhere. Within further 24 hours, The Guardian had a double-page spread where their specialist departmental correspondents had written a data-driven story about defence, about education, about health. So some of that's is about PR, good data, very bad news, and all that sort of thing. Some of it's about, but in the end, if the data's out there, people will find a way through it and find the nuggets. And if people want to put out more data to blur for a while, then I think I'd encourage them to do it, because once they put it out there, they can't deny it's impossible to put it out there.
I think that's already happening, not because of a desire to drown us in it, but it's already happening because there's more data being put out than we have got. There are developers and there are people to do things with it and to make it understandable. I was speaking at a session a couple of hours ago, in preparation for that. This was about journalism. I pulled up the Openly Local page about spending for Manchester and came up with a bunch of, and I looked for looked at the biggest suppliers that Manchester had, and around about 20 or something was redacted ones. And redacted for personal data is supposed to be for a very specific reason, to hide so that vulnerable people aren't identified, particularly things like foster parents and the kids and so on. Yet the largest payment was for, I can't remember what it was for. It was for something really strange, and it was for something like £1 million or something, for something that got nothing to do with anything. The second one was for hospitality for 150,000 in the Chief Executive Department, and you're thinking, wait a minute, that's not really right. I can't try to work out what the vulnerable people there that would be being protected by that goes. Yet that data's been on Openly Local there for probably a couple of months and no one's seen it. I hadn't looked at it because I'm busy putting the data out there. I think that's already happening, and that with so much data that it's difficult to know where to look. And even though there are stories out there that journalists could be writing stories about every single day, they're slightly overwhelmed. I think the other thing is that one of the things that is incumbent upon people doing this is to reduce the barriers. What we have at the moment is we have spreadsheets, and what we've had for quite some time is spreadsheets. One of the first things I did on Openly Local was to take a slightly obscure Department of Communities and Local Government spreadsheet that was locked, that had been used by virtually no one, to pull it into a database, and so that you could see where the money goes in proportion to your in your council, and how it compared with other councils and things like that. And probably I would be surprised if 100 people had looked at that spreadsheet before, because it was hidden. And I would be surprised that of those people, how many had really got to understand it, because you had to be really, really good at spreadsheets. And many people in government are really, really good at spreadsheets. We have some of the best spreadsheet people in the world in government. But you had to do that, or you had to be an accountant or so on. But actually, it reduced the barriers. It didn't mean that everyone could see it. And I think, speaking to Kerry's point about the people who aren't here, one of the things that it allows us to do, it doesn't make it happen, but it allows us to do, is to put this information in a form that people with accessibility issues can do it. It puts it in a form that actually can be made that all sorts of people can understand it, not just those who spend their days looking at spreadsheets or balance sheets or things like that. And it allows it to be made understandable. It doesn't make it understandable, but it allows it to do that. And so it's incumbent on people to go that extra step in terms of doing it. So it's enabling rather than doing.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I think I will throw my often Luddite point in defence of the spreadsheet, which is there's been this very interesting way in the way the data for developers narrative has played out in data being published, is often there's a pressure to publish in as raw a form as possible, as structured and clean a form, but then actually when you load it into your spreadsheet, all those contextual notes that help you understand it have been stripped out. And we need both. We need data for humans and data for machines in parallel, so that the point where someone finds a spreadsheet that Chris hasn't yet analysed, they can actually go in and explore it and find the particular fact they wanted or do something with it. The other key is we've got to be building those skills. So one project I've been working on, Open Data Cookbook, .NET, just trying to document what do you do when you find a messy spreadsheet, how can you use some free tools to explore this data, trying to write it so it is so friendly that all my friends I've got who are terrified of graphs, I've got a lot of people I talk to, young people who just hate graphs, how can we write something that they'll be able to work with and explore?
Other questions? Oh, yeah. James.
Hi, yeah, it's a really great engaging discussion, and it's a really complex issue. But I'm just wondering if, like in the UK, we're a little bit drunk on data and, you know, the empowering nature of data and information. I mean, take schools. You know, education has been measured every single which way, and, you know, we've got priorities and schools and competitive marketplaces, and basically that excludes poor families. And then you compare our approach of measuring everything to Finland, where they just invest in teachers and, you know, they're brilliant. And, you know, who's winning, basically, in terms of educational outputs, you know. So that's, you know.
Can I just second that? I mean, what we're seeing in the education system is the marketisation of education, and data is used as a way of allowing parents to choose between good schools, as opposed to the discussion, how do I just have a good school that's down the road that I can send my kids to? So we need to recognise that a lot of this is deeply embedded in a political ideology of the consumption, the market democracy, rather than a participatory democracy. So one of the questions we need to be, again, it's about what are the questions that we want to ask of the data?
Yeah, and that's absolutely my point. We should be using data as an enabler to drive our services and improve them. So all of our schools should be good schools. It shouldn't be a question of providing data so people can choose the best one. We should be using the data to drive us as public servants to make sure that all of them are good schools and all are first choice, so they're all a school of choice. It so happens that the borough I'm in, they probably are anyway, but we're probably the exception on that one. There was just one other thing that struck me when you talked about opening up your spreadsheets. It's a couple of years ago now, about 2 years ago, and it's another example of data. It's not fully open data. You'll probably be disappointed to hear when I tell you what we've done, but there's probably no reason why in the future it can't be. About 2 years ago, working as lead for procurement in Greater Manchester, I looked at where we were buying our data from to do our benchmarking on contracts. And we were buying it from a private company, and each authority was spending a huge amount of money every year, thousands of pounds, to buy data from a private company that was out of date. It was always about a year out of date, because by the time they gathered it from each local authority and put it together and crunched the numbers, they gave you data on contracts that actually was of not much use to you to influence your buying from those contracts. And I thought, this is not really sensible, because if we put together all of the spend that we're spending and built something and owned it ourselves, and then we wouldn't have to give anybody else money, and we'd have real live data. And we went about building a tool, and we call it Spend Pro, and we now have this tool in place. We have live data. It was a bit like the journey we had with Data GM. There was an issue of trust, first of all, because everybody had to give you their spend, their contract spends, and you know, people are a bit worried about that, to put onto the data site, so that actually for it to be useful to them, their information had to be in there. And every authority now, all 10 in Greater Manchester, all their spend data is on that site. We now have 14 or 15 authorities, so outside of Greater Manchester, right across to Blackpool, Wirral, Cheshire's, they're all on the same site. They get live data. I got some funding, so they didn't have to pay to build the site. We actually got some funding to build the site because the idea was such a good idea. We don't spend money with the private sector anymore buying out-of-date data. And we have, each authority has access into the tool. They get live data. It can influence the contracts. We have saved millions. And I couldn't put an exact figure, but I can tell you it's millions through this system. We did desktop exercises where we just collated data. Who's buying from the same contractor? How much are you buying it for? How much are you buying it for? Big difference in price. Go and negotiate a better price. We have it all transparent. They can't hide it. They can't lie to you and say it's cheaper somewhere else. We've probably saved, I couldn't put a figure in the last 2-3 years, probably 10 million. We're looking at saving maybe another 20 million over the next 3 years through just renegotiating existing contracts and amalgamation of big contracts, because our spend is 2.6 billion. So there has to be economies of scale in there.
Okay, you were going to ask a question earlier.
Thank you very much. Not so much a question, because this, as you said, is a dialogue, and I want to make a comment about structure. I have to say, I'm bored to death with this sort of structure, because it perpetuates the very thing that is not needed, where I can't help but going, even though I don't want to, going, well, you people are the elite. And I know that you're not. And actually, I want to hear from the audience. And I wonder what would happen if there was a total role reversal. That's the first point.
That's all right by us. Yeah.
Great. The second point is I'm worried, and I don't like being worried, because I fear that there's a new iconism happening, which is the word data. I'm hot at the moment. Do I take my temperature? No, I say I'm hot. I'm worried because of what you said. There's still the elitism that we make the final decision. What I want to see is the form of democracy where I can say to you, you're out of a job. I'm going to take your seat. I don't know what your job is. Please explain your job to me. And the last thing is the point that you made, sir, about actually when you're outside of government, you're quite right. It is absolutely impossible to contact government. Thank you for making the point.
Any responses? Or can I open it out to everybody else?
Yeah, absolutely. That's the problem.
I can wait for ages. Oh no, I don't have fear. There are people here who want to make points in response to that. There you go. Behind you.
I feel the need to fill the gap a little bit here, because I do actually work a lot with open data and amongst other things. And I think that some of the things that haven't actually been addressed here is this sort of problem of resources. And it takes enormous, I mean, people are talking about skills and so forth, and what it actually takes to sort of get data into a shape when people can use it. And I think Chris made a very interesting point about talking about this spreadsheet, which had like thrown experts at this spreadsheet, and they still couldn't find this extraordinary piece of information. And it is technically possible to make the kinds of tools that make these things relatively transparent, but it takes huge amounts of resources to actually get the data into some kind of shape where you can make it, and then further resources to actually build the tools that are sort of actually customized and will make that work. And unfortunately, I don't see that problem really going away. And I mean, I have to admit, I'm a little bit saddened by everything I'm hearing at the moment, because it feels like we are actually getting to a point where we're just sort of putting out data. And it's great, because as the gentleman from the Cabinet Office pointed out, if they don't release it, they can't. If they release it, they can't say it's not possible to release it. So it's a good thing that it's out there. But we still have this enormous barrier to actually get over, to simply get things into a format where anybody could work with it. You know, let alone sort of data experts or the general public. It doesn't actually, matter what you're doing. I mean, for a human being to actually find this kind of data and make it actually mean something it's an enormous task. And that's actually presupposing that you even know what you want to do with it. So anyway, I'll pass on the mic now. Someone else is coming to fill the gap.
I completely agree, but that's at the moment. We're kind of just at the start. It's like when Penguin made the paperback sort of like widely available, and I know Penguin didn't make the paperback widely available using public money, but when they started publishing puff-in books of collected philosophy, it took a while for those books to kind of get out, and a lot of them were very poorly sold because no one knew what to do with them, or no one knew how to understand it. So you have to learn to understand, and it's a process. So where publishing a spreadsheet might be almost instantaneous, understanding it isn't. And once we learn to understand one, then we'll be quicker at understanding the next. And eventually, a few years down the line, I think someone earlier said it was like a 5-year plan. Maybe in 5 years, we'll be at the stage where we can directly talk to people through kind of things we find in a spreadsheet. Fingers crossed. I would like to hope so. I'd like to be optimistic rather than look at something at the start of it and pick apart what could go wrong with it and prevent it from going forward because of those potential problems.
Okay, there's, I think the gentleman over here was... no, I'm hallucinating. Okay, Tim would like to say something.
Yeah, so I think it raises this really interesting question of what is that infrastructure, what is the ecosystem, what is it we need to turn this from raw materials into practice? Is it a new civic duty on people to feel a sense of civic duty around the armchair auditing, or if we can find a far better name for that, of just being public scrutiny of things and exploring and holding elected representatives and officials to account? Do we need the civic duty? Do we need a new sense of a commons where we're collectively investing in the infrastructure that sustains the intermediaries between data and ourselves? Chris is doing amazing work as almost a one-man sort of force for creating public information artifacts, but actually we need to invest in that because that needs sustainability, that needs people to be able to feed the family while doing that work and not just being those who can afford to by cross-subsidising from other places. Do we need the new industry for that? And I think we've got to ask that question. I don't have answers to those questions.
I'm grappling with that myself,
yeah.
As you'd expect. In some respects, openly local is a type of commons. And should I own it? Should it be owned by the people? Should it be funded by the people? Should it be funded by business? What should it do? I actually started it without expecting it to still be going. I started it just as literally started it as a proof of concept because no one else seemed to be interested in doing this. And it's grown and it's grown and it's grown and it's grown. And I don't know what I don't know whether it should be. I don't know whether it could be. And I don't know whether it should grow and be more of a commons, whether it should interface more closely with the councils and so on. And actually, it's not that I don't care. It's just that I don't even know if I'm the right person to be answering that. I would say, my perspective on all of this is that this raises, or this is, we're seeing a big problem here, and where the problem is called the future. And we're just looking at this problem. When we're talking about open data, we're looking at this problem from one angle, but we can look at it from all sorts of angles. When we're talking about I think it was the consumerization of democracy, or of choice and things like that. Increasingly, the corporate organisations are more important than governments are, and governments are becoming have less power, have less ability to raise taxes, have less ability to I mean, the issue with super injunctions and Twitter, whether you believe that there should be super injunctions or not, the fact is that the UK government has no power there. It may have jurisdiction, but the jurisdiction is only any good to the extent that you have power to enforce it. And increasingly, the UK government, the German government, whatever, has less power because these things are being controlled by countries, by organisations, whether it's in areas that we have no power to influence, whether it's Facebook or even WikiLeaks. The WikiLeaks is almost a logical conclusion, given that so much of the world is outside of the ability of democratic structures to control them, then it's almost a reaction to that. And I think there are big questions. Are we going back to city-states? How do countries work in a way when they can't collect taxes? One of the things that really scares me is the fact that, yes, you can talk about things like liquid democracy or whatever, but I have yet to see an example of moving from one type of democracy or one type of government to another without there being violence on the way. And whatever we think about how the future is going to be, I think it's one where we should. I personally am what I call a defiant pessimist, which is that we're going to hell in a handbasket, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't fight for a better world and we shouldn't work to have a better world and solve those problems. Is that right?
Yeah, it's fine. Yes, I have a great sympathy with that position. But at the same time, could I suggest that it is the end of a Thursday and that we might also explore words like delight and pleasure and play I'm always very interested when we talk about a deficit model of significant numbers of people in terms of their ability to access and use data when we look at the complexity of the interfaces that they're used to playing computer games. Okay, so one of the questions that we might need to ask is where are our assumptions about the people that we're working with? And I know a computer game is way better designed than the average spreadsheet, but still. So one of the things I'd quite like to ask the audience and the people on the panel here is, instead of pushing, because this feels like a big push against a blooming enormous obstacle, and there's a real sense of, God, this is hard work, and here are all the problems. What might pull people, ourselves, to do, to create the sorts of worlds that we want to create? What are the things that act as attractors? What are the things that excite all of you about working in this area? Because you're not just doing it to make the world a better place. You're also kind of a bit geekily, you kind of like it, you know? So what might draw us into, and where are the opportunities, and where are the exciting things and the pleasures? I wonder if we could just finish with some thoughts about the positive futures that we might see. And I will look at my colleagues here and see if anybody's got any suggestions.
I'll start with one. Probably won't like it. There's been a lot of talk, I think, from government recently around big society, and everybody wonders what it is. And
rather than getting in the way of it and making it difficult.
I mean, there are two things that excite me. First is the effect on the inside of knowing the data will be opened up. And that, in traditional public administration, it was very stodgy, but there was a sense of a fiduciary duty. And public money had to be especially guarded. And we've gone through a period when you'd spend something on something in the office, which you certainly wouldn't spend your own money on. Yeah, public money, you ought to be even more cautious of it. So increasing the risk of getting caught is a very important part of transparency. The other thing is that, with some exceptions, which are really good, generally the government is pretty bad at putting out information about services, doing its websites, and so on and so on. Some work going on with that. But why should the government be the monopoly provider of that? Can't we get innovation of how you take information about government services, perhaps how you do those services in the longer term, into varied, diverse, competitive marketplace, so people can choose how to interact. It can be structured differently for different communities. People can intermediate that, and you have a choice of a journey planner, or where you get your rail timetable information, where you get your information about GP surgery opening times, and that, by having variety there and giving people a choice, then I think can only make things better.
Thank you. Okay, a couple of last comments if there are here, and then Julie. Oh,
no, I just want to say, I mean, what I think I find draws me into it is, it's like I just want to understand what's going on, and I think that's very attractive, just to be able to understand why does this happen, why does this do this. The world isn't an arbitrary place. There are meanings and reasons, and I think that's what it's a curiosity about the world that I think will be inevitably kind of draw people into this.
And I think that hits it for me. I'm not so excited by the competition, but the potential for learning and collaboration. And actually my experience of working with people in government, maybe I've been very lucky who I've worked with, but they are passionate about creating change in particular areas. And that thought earlier of do we need an infrastructure to this? We actually already pay thousands of people to be enthusiastic to work with data, to explore it, to make a difference with it. And if open data can be used for more open government, more collaborative government, with citizens, officials, others working together, that's really exciting, and I think that's the reason people turn up to many open data things, is the opportunity to work together with people, collaborate, be social with data, just as a bit of an enabler for that social interaction.
I've got.
There's just a colleague just up at the end there. So while we're moving the microphone just to the back, join in, Chris.
Well, when we're trying to be hopeful, I'm quite, they used to call me Eeyore where I work because I'm a pessimist. But trying to be hopeful and trying to be positive, there's one thing that gives me hope, and there's one thing that makes me feel, which I see as a possible positive strategy. The thing that gives me hope, actually, is in the year and a half that I've been dealing with government, when they actually, someone in the Cabinet Office called me up and said, we like what you're doing, will you come and speak to us? I have been really gladdened and given an enormous amount of hope in that there were people, and Andrew is one of them, and when I first came across Andrew at an event, I thought, okay, usual, you know, middle-aged, comfortable, civil service duffer sort of thing, you know, been there all his life.
You look like a fat lawyer. Someone once said.
I think, okay. But actually, what they have done, and it isn't visible to most people who haven't interacted, is they, without any benefits, career benefits themselves, and actually at considerable career risk to themselves, people like Andrew, Richard Sterling, the people at National Archives, have actually done things because they thought they were the right things to do and would make things a little less shit. And not because there was going to be career advancement. In fact, it was actually, they risked their personal and professional capital in order to do that. And that gives me great hope that the people have been in the civil service for some time, sometimes, and still did that. And I think, and when you speak to the councils, there again, people like that, who despite working there for some time have actually still have that drive and that hope and willing to do things because they think it's the right thing. The thing that makes me, I like as a way is, I think it's humour, you know. And actually, I think things like UK Uncut will be seen as being really important, not because they will make any difference to the tax code or any of those other sorts of things, but they are generally in a completely non-violent, they're basically saying, drawing attention, and they're using their ability to have to create standing in the conversation, to actually start the thing, using humour, singing silly songs. It's the Mark Thomas thing, which is, okay, we have to apply for a march in order to do our demonstration. Well, let's see, how many demonstrations can we apply for the day? It's almost like the reductio absurdum type approach. You know, what can we do if it says we can't walk upon this, you know, that part of the street because that's private property. Well, it used to be public property, it's now private property. Let's all try and walk, you know, in a line, balancing along the line so that we can do it and actually draw attention with humour to it.
Playfulness and humour as the little strategy through. One last comment from the chap at the back, so make it good.
Oh, sorry, I was thinking one of the things that's quite interesting about this whole conversation is really it feels faintly uncomfortable that it's existing power holders talking to people with power and influence. You know, the examples we've had of The Guardian very quickly turning around in 24 hours colossally complex spreadsheets into something digestible is because they've got access to X million people that can do that. And it's very easy when they've got their audience and that kind of mind share to enact that. But for anybody else in this room, there's not a hope in hell they can do that. You know, it's exactly the same power structures that can work, and well, bear with me. So what I'm wondering is, perhaps there's a different level of engagement that we need to kind of address and really think through. I know there are issues around parsing, manipulating, understanding data, and there's a certain amount of education that's missing from the structure. But I think there's an interesting model already in civic society of a kind of relationship between the kind of establishment powers and the common men. So something like jury service, I think, is a really interesting model of bringing together established, entrenched experts and bringing the public in to engage and respond to them. And maybe we should be thinking about that kind of model as a way of actually really building value around engagement between published data and people that can respond to and start to understand that data.
As always, we finish a conversation on one of the most interesting points. I'd like to leave us with a little bit of thinking about which sort of power do we think we're disrupting here? Is it economic, political, social, legal? Which ones are we trying to get into? How are they going to work? And also a question, how do we know we've succeeded? I'm a researcher, I can't help it. I ask the question, what metrics are we using? So Which sort of power are we getting at? How do we know when we succeeded? And is it possible to think about play, humour and delight to pull people to what we're doing, to attract them to it, rather than constantly standing behind them saying, you really should be engaging with this? And I think that's not been proven to be a particularly successful strategy in the past. I'd like to thank the panel, and I'd like to thank all of you. And I hope that the conversation will carry on in a nice democratic format where everybody's standing on the same level. So thanks very much, all of you.